Please like and subscribe.
Welcome to Galactic Initiative. I'm your host, Jeff. In this video, Grand Admiral Sean and I will discuss Kennedy Films' launch of the sequel trilogy, that is, The Force Awakens, for its 10th anniversary. Welcome, Sean.
Hello, my friend.
Recently, we've experienced many commentaries in the vein of revisionist history. Seemingly every YouTube channel with ties to Star Wars has produced a takedown of The Force Awakens. We would like to provide a fairer or more honest critique of the film and its period, informed by our perspectives in the moment and after the fact. Hindsight indicates The Force Awakens was neither a 2 billion pop culture phenomena nor a complete failure without redeeming qualities. Sean, looking back at The Force Awakens, contrast your initial impression with your current impression. What did you think of TFA at the time? What do you think of TFA now?
When I walked out of the theater after the first viewing of it, I was not upset for what it did or didn't do. I was, not overjoyed or enthused, and it did not strike me as the best Star Wars ever made at that point. But, I was not upset with it. I remember a group of people in our Star Wars club, we all went and saw it together at our social group. We all went to that. And when we came out of there, one guy in the group was angry. He was flipping over tables and calling it a fan film and all this stuff and stormed off. And he sort of disappeared after that point. It was never a part of the modern Star Wars, Disney Star Wars landscape. And it turns out he was clairvoyant, or he was more perceptive than the rest of us. But we were all kind of like, okay, there was a couple of things there that probably could have been done better, but it was enjoyable. It was entertaining. It was Star Wars. It had all the Star Wars things in it, and there was enough nostalgia and whatnot. We all sort of anticipated a lot of the things that were going on in the film. We knew that the original actors were aging out, and that this was going to be some kind of trilogy of films that would hand off the legacy and the saga, and so we could keep going into the future with new characters and all that kind of stuff. But there was varying feelings about the death of Han Solo. I think when I came out of it, I was not shocked at all by that happening. I actually expected it, but I think in the back of my mind there was kind of that idea of the wasted opportunity of not having all the original characters together in a scene, and being disappointed that Luke Skywalker was not featured in it. But they start off the crawl with Luke has disappeared, so you're like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to see a lot of him. Or you might have hope that you would have seen what he was doing while he disappeared. But we came out of that movie going, okay, this is established the first opening act of a trilogy. It's a cliffhanger. We see Luke at the end. He and Rey are standing across from each other. The music comes up, cut to credits. Okay, this is clearly going to be continued, and not just in the to be continued, like at some point we're going to pick up the story down the road. We're really going to have to pick up where this one left off. And so, initially I came out of it, I was not unhappy. I saw the movie several more times in the theater. I think, if we go back and look at some of our earlier commentary on these films, I think when I watched it the second time, and this is a lot of these films, we would go opening night, or we'd see the preview or whatever, and you'd be there with a bunch of fellow nerds, and people would be cheering and and all this stuff, and so you miss dialogue. And so, okay, go back and watch it a couple more times. That initial super reaction, the joy, whatever, of of having Star Wars again after many years, you're able to interact with the film more, or at least pay closer attention. And it still didn't bother me that much. I think there started to be a few things here and there, again, around Han Solo's death, Rey being overpowered, sort of the weird governmental structure and the where did the First Order come from? I mean, it really just sort of started to coalesce around unanswered questions. But it didn't bother me as much as perhaps it should have, because I just made the assumption, like a lot of people did, that we have a trilogy of films announced. We know another one is coming soon. This one was left on a cliffhanger, so clearly we're going to get some answers, right? We're going to have all of these lingering things. Who is Snoke? Will all be answered in future installments. And trust the process, trust the people. We have no reason at this point to question Disney. They're doing great things with Marvel, hitting full stride with their cinematic universe. Everybody's loving the stuff that's coming out. And so I was generally okay with it. It was a good looking movie. I enjoyed the design cues and the updates to certain things. Wasn't necessarily a big fan of the new Stormtrooper look, but the updated X-Wings and the tweaks to the outfits and, the stuff like that, it all made sense. Again, it was visually in line with what you would expect from the universe and a slight evolution into the future with technology and things like that. Not a big deal. Though the thing that really kind of stuck out to me initially as the sore thumb in the film was the Hosnian Prime explosion, the one laser turning into 5 lasers and going across the galaxy and blowing up all the planets. The sucking in the sun kind of to power the new Death Star or whatever. I mean, even initially, the new Death Star didn't really bother me, which is weird because now after 10 years of reflection and looking back on it, we're like, oh my God, it's just a remake of episode 4. And, anyway, but initially, like, none of that really bothered me. It was different enough. And again, we continuously have our expectations set through our previous experiences. And we spent so much time with George Lucas and the prequels and him talking about, the stuff rhymes and it's, I sort of retell the same story in a different way. Maybe I invert it. Maybe it has similar beats, use all that poetry talk. And so I was like, okay, maybe the reason why this feels very familiar is because we want it to feel familiar, right? We want the fans to get back into this. We want to show continuity while introducing new things, but we want to be comfortable. We want to give people, we don't want to upset too many people, right? We want to do it safe. So I'm like, okay, this is a decent foundation for a new trilogy. And then we're going to go forward. We're going to get answers to questions. We're probably going to take a few risks. We're going to do some interesting and new stuff, and it's going to be great. And so my mindset about Star Wars and leaving Force Awakens in the theater was so far so good. Not the best, but definitely not the worst. And I'll patiently await the next installment in this saga. 10 years later, after now having lived through the second and third installment in this trilogy and all of the mismanagement of the IP by Disney Lucasfilm and the Kathleen Kennedy administration and all of the Disney Plus debacles and all the, the very bad things that have come out of their ownership of the property. I mean, aside from a couple of things like Rogue One and the Andor series and the first season and a half of The Mandalorian, the old saying, familiarity breeds contempt. And now, of course, through a decade of watching this movie, seeing what it's set up, thoroughly analyzing it, hours and hours of content on YouTube, people talking about it, a full post-mortem autopsy on this film, frame by frame, scene by scene, everything. Like, we have gone through this film on a cellular level, and now we are all quite confident that it was a terrible movie and that it was disrespectful to George Lucas's vision and his galaxy and his characters and to the fan base, and and it was all just trash. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing now is that while that may or may not be true, it's more true than it isn't, but we are seeing a lot of people who are confidently espousing their hatred for the film was from day one. And I can't buy that. I am as salty and bitter as the next long-term Star Wars fan about what has happened to the Skywalker saga, what happened to the IP of Star Wars and all that. But I'm not intellectually dishonest in my assessment of where I was at in my headspace at the time. We had heard Lucas talk about his ideas. He had envisioned a trilogy of films based on a female Jedi or young person or whatever. That was kind of in line with what he wanted. We knew that, we were going to have the original characters in the film in a diminished capacity. Did we think initially that it was handled well? No, but we weren't, entirely upset about it. I personally went into that movie fully anticipating Han Solo to be killed. I'd heard enough from Harrison Ford in interview after interview after interview throughout his life, how much he hated the character of Han Solo and how he never wanted to play Han Solo again, and how he'd ask George to kill him off, and the whole carbon freeze thing was a way to remove him from the story. Should he not be available for a third installment? How do we get around, like, how can we write him out of the film? And all these things that, that we've analyzed and been exposed to and heard about. And, and I figured, when they announced that they got everybody back, we knew they were going to get Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher back. Their careers were kind of dead in the water at that point. Nice big payout, a little bit of nostalgia, hit the banquet circuit, free drinks for everybody. Of course, they're going to sign up for it. But, Harrison Ford actually had a career beyond Star Wars and did a bunch of stuff. And not that he had this great reputation. He wasn't like Laurence Olivier or whatever, but he felt that character was sort of beneath him and, was not as compelling or as interesting as other characters that he's played. And so he kind of just never wanted to go back to it. So when they announced that they got him back and they were paying him some stupid like $20 million to do the movie, I figured they got to kill him. So fully anticipating that when it happened, I was like, okay, Harrison Ford got what he wanted, and didn't really step back and analyze it on a more profound level of what it really meant for the character and for the trilogy going forward, and the missed opportunities and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, we have the second installment, and then Carrie Fisher dies, and it's like, okay, now we're way off now. And so the third movie is just complete eclectic garbage, made up of a bunch of edited footage, cutting room floor footage of this dead person that we have to try and weave in and try and use her dialogue and make it make sense. And it's just, anyway. So it unraveled quickly behind the scenes. But again, this is all stuff we learned later. And so now we look back on it, we're like, oh my God, this is terrible. And we did, we only had so much time with these actors, and then Carrie Fisher died. And oh my God, and then, and Han's dead, and all three of them weren't on the screen at the same time. And that's what we really wanted. And it's like, yeah, that's what we really wanted. But this movie is also taking place 30 years after the fact. So who knows where the characters are at and what they're doing, right? They might, again, even if Luke hadn't been in hiding, okay, he's over on his planet doing his Jedi Academy stuff. Han's probably out doing military things. He was a general in the last movie. Leia is probably a politician running the show, right? We're kind of all in that. So maybe they're not all together on the screen at the same time, but they're all together in the film doing their characters' work. Like, I would have been fine with that. Of course, it only becomes more of a tragedy when Carrie Fisher dies suddenly in the middle of all of it. And then we've also killed off Han Solo. So now it's like, okay, we're never going to get all of them on the screen at the same time. But we've kind of sat and marinated in all of this stuff. And the promises that we thought were made, or the promises that we made to ourselves is probably the better way to put it, about the payoffs from The Force Awakens were never delivered on. And so I think that now, in retrospect, we feel even more betrayed by the film, or more disappointed with the film, because as we've learned through the years with the interviews with J.J. Abrams and others, that there was no plan, there was no solid story arc in place for the trilogy, there was no end in sight. It was all very ad hoc and in the moment. the least worst thing you could do is just make a rip-off of episode 4 and hope for the best with what happens down the road. But then, of course, everything kind of got out of hand. And at that point, you can't really put the genie back in the bottle. And with the, gift of hindsight, and with all the things that we've dealt with Kathleen Kennedy and the fan base and the ill will between all that, and the terrible Last Jedi, and the even worse Rise of Skywalker, and then the Acolyte, and all these other things, it's like that all kind of rolls into one big emotional ball. And then we look back on The Force Awakens and we have all that angst and all that bitterness, and we're like even more critical of it. So was it a good movie? No. Was it the worst Star Wars ever? No. Do we hate it more now that we've had to sit with it for a long time? Yes. Were we all mad about it when it first came out? Definitely not. I think that we were the same place we were with The Phantom Menace. It had been over a decade since there had been any Star Wars in the movie theaters. We were all feeling Star Wars deprived. There was so much great hype going into it. The people who were making it were saying all the right things. The sale of Lucasfilm to Disney, all the right things were said at the time. We're going to honor the characters. We're going to honor the legacy. People were out on the hype tour talking about practical effects and a return to tradition with Star Wars. And, all of our people were there. All of our actors came back. They were all at Celebration talking about how wonderful it was. We saw the new actors who were going to be playing these new characters. They were all people, for the most part, that people we respected. So we had all this goodwill going into it. And I don't think that it disappeared overnight. I mean, you made, 2 point whatever billion dollars on that film. If it had really died overnight, nobody would have gone to see Rogue One. And then nobody would have gone to see The Last Jedi. Where did we have the big fall off in fan participation? Was between The Last Jedi and then, of course, the whole Solo problem, right? We can relitigate that. But the point was that it wasn't really until we realized at the end of The Last Jedi that what we expected from The Force Awakens wasn't going to happen. And I think that's when people really started to turn on The Force Awakens, because The Force Awakens was still had the goodwill. It was still the first installment. We forgave a lot because we expected it to be cleaned up, over the course of the trilogy. And then when we realized what happened to the trilogy by the end of The Last Jedi, we lumped it in and sort of threw it all out. The gift of time. And it has given us this perspective on the film.
Let's continue to address unanswered questions and questionable decisions. You already covered one, a big one, Han Solo's death. But I'd like to walk you down memory lane for specific reactions. I'll identify an issue, you share your viewpoint. Agreeable?
Sure.
Okay. We're going to get Sean's honest reaction. He has not seen the list. Here we go. Luke Skywalker's absence.
That was definitely a questionable decision, but not in the grand scheme of things, not the worst thing in the film. And I only say that, I mean, it's a bad decision. Obviously, we talked about, if you're going to kill off Han Solo, you need to have at some point some kind of reunion, right? I think we all retroactively, even the people who were extending grace, about his death, kind of recognized shortly after seeing it, like, it really would have been nice to have all three of them on screen at one point. The movie, I mean, starts off, you have your crawl. The crawl says Luke Skywalker's disappeared. Okay, great. I didn't realize that was going to mean that he wasn't going to be in the movie. You could have written his character differently in the film. I mean, of course, we can all rewrite the movie and make it way better. But if you had some kind of thing where maybe early on, even in the crawl, you could have said, Luke Skywalker has disappeared. He went looking for the origins of the Jedi many years ago and hasn't been heard from. Okay, great. That gives you a little more. Show me somewhere in the film questing, right? Or maybe you start the movie with that, where he comes across the first temple or whatever. And then you cut back to whatever your current problem is with the First Order and Rey and all that crap. But you could have at least shown, okay, this is what Luke is doing, right? And then maybe check in on him a little later, and then maybe at the end they catch up with him. And you don't have to have the big conversation, right? Maybe you do end it the way you ended the film the first time, right? Where Rey shows up with his lightsaber and is like, "Oh my God, you're Luke," and he's like, "Yeah, I'm Luke. What up?" But and then you just end it there, and you wait for the big moment, like you and I had talked about earlier. You can have that Obi-Wan Kenobi in the hut moment where you have the telling you the story of what's been going on and where your father came from, like all that kind of stuff, right? And you could have had a similar conversation there on Ahch-To, where he could have been explaining to Rey, this is why I'm looking for the Jedi Temple or whatever. Like, I'm trying to restart the Order, and I finally found this stuff. You want to be my apprentice, whatever. I don't know. Like, you could have done, 100 different things with it. But for him to be completely absent from the film until the last moment, it felt a little overdone. Yeah, Luke Skywalker, he really disappeared. Like, he literally was gone. But again, compared to the way the character of Han Solo was brutalized in the first movie, his regression in character and all of that, it's only matched by the regression of Luke in the second film. But in this, since we're just talking about The Force Awakens, it's like compared to all the bad plot decisions and all the silly contrivances and the Mary Sue action and the way we just assassinated the character of Han Solo, Luke not being in the film was not the worst decision they made, but it definitely was a questionable one.
Next, connected with the previous, the map to Skywalker.
That one felt a little silly. So initially, again, when you're watching the movie, you're like, oh, okay, the map, the piece of the map, I had to go get the thing. We're all familiar with MacGuffins, right? We're all familiar with the thing that needs to be found so you can do the thing to solve the problem or save the day or whatever. But upon further review, and again, this is what the gift of time and repeated watchings of the film and sort of sitting there and thinking about it and analyzing it and looking at it, like, the map idea is so incredibly silly. The map shows the entire galaxy, and there's a portion there that is missing. And conveniently, like a pirate map of old-timey pirate map, there's a dotted line of where Luke was going, and it goes into the box, the missing space. The mystery box, if you will. You start looking at that, and you're like, okay, that's still a significant portion of the galaxy, but it sure as hell narrows down where Luke might be. So why isn't the First Order in that? If again, if you read the crawl says that their mission is to destroy Luke Skywalker, who is the last Jedi, then why aren't they scouring the box? Start at one end and hit every planet that can sustain humanoid life, or start blowing them up with your Starkiller base, perhaps. I don't know, right? You have this world-killing tool. Instead of going after the loathsome Republic, start blowing up planets, man. Because if the most important thing is killing the last Jedi, then you should probably be after that, not worrying about a bunch of bureaucrats on Hosnian Prime or whatever. I understand what you're trying to do with it, right? We kind of know where Luke might be, and it's a big chunk of space, and it's a lot of planets, and but it's a lot less than it would have been if you just said he's somewhere out there, and you kind of wave your arm at the starfield. He's over there. Okay, that's 20,000 systems or whatever. Maybe you narrowed it down to like 500 or 800 or whatever. Okay, that's a lot easier to deal with. Did we or did we not in Empire Strikes Back use probe droids? Right? Did we not launch them at all the worlds that could potentially house the Rebel base? And eventually we found them, right? It took several years, clearly, right? Because between episodes 4 and 5, time has passed, characters have done things, right? The war between the rebellion and the Empire is still going on. Yeah, they blew up the Death Star, but you know what? Still going on, not going well. They're hiding on a planet. Why not, if we're going to rip off Star Wars, why don't we just rip off Star Wars and just say that the First Order's been sending out probe droids and they came across a little something. Maybe they found his sunken X-Wing or whatever. I don't know. The concept, the silly concept of giving R2 85% of the map and giving 15% of the map to Lor Santeca. Who's this guy? Where does he come from? See, this is the problem, is if you sit down for a moment and stop, and again, I was fully guilty of this, but if you sit down the first time and you're like, oh my God, I'm getting Star Wars for the first time in a decade, and I'm in a movie theater, and oh my God, this is amazing, this popcorn is delicious, and holy shit, that's an X-Wing fighter, right? You don't sit down and start asking questions like, who is Lor Santeca? Why does he have this portion of the map to find Luke? What is his relationship to Luke? Why did Luke give that to him and not to R2? Why did Luke give that to him and not to Leia? Why did Luke give it to him and not to Han or anybody else for that matter? This will make things right. You know, like, okay, what does that mean? You were holding out, like things weren't right before, but now they are because you told them where Luke is? Like, okay, what does that mean? The map thing just starts to unravel as many things in this film do when you start applying some sort of, you know, plot kind of element, or you start talking about in-universe rules of things and whatever. Like, it just all starts to unravel. So the treasure map initially, again, like so many things in this film, didn't feel bad. It was kind of like, treasure map. It's kind of old-timey weird stuff to be in a sci-fi movie, but I get what you're trying to do. But the more you look at it, just the worse it gets and the more silly it becomes.
Captain Phasma.
Captain Phasma, the Silver Stormtrooper. Gwendolyn Christie, fresh off of her success in Game of Thrones, cast to play Captain Phasma, the first female Stormtrooper, probably the first female Imperial at this point. I mean, if you look at the prequels and if you look at Clone Wars, there's some characters there, but if you're just talking about cinema, the continuation of the original trilogy, a lot of excitement around that character, a lot of, you know, like, ooh, what's this going to be? And look at her uniform, and she's different than the other stormtroopers, and she's shiny, and she has a cape, and all that stuff. And if you listen to the interviews that, you know, Gwendolyn gave while she was out on the press tour, this great, strong female villain, and, you know, all this stuff, and we're like, this is going to be dope. I can't wait. And then we get her for 2 minutes, and she gets thrown in a garbage chute. And that's it. And then they try and redeem her and bring her back, and then she still gets kind of treated like garbage. That was again a huge miss. The character, like, if we're going to talk about stormtroopers, you know, Captain Phasma and Finn are probably two of the most intriguing characters in the new film, and two of the biggest disappointments when it came to character development. The fact that you have a stormtrooper, who takes his helmet off, right, with Finn, we are humanizing the enemy, right? The reason why the stormtroopers look like they do is because we want a faceless, nameless evil. Vader, helmet, black outfit, cloak, voice changer. Something not quite human about him. We haven't quite figured this out yet. His stormtroopers, faceless, nameless. They don't have names, they have numbers. They speak through voice modulators, right? It's, again, something not quite human about them, right? They go, and it's not until we get movies like Solo and then maybe even the prequels where we see stormtroopers not wearing white armor. But to think about this now, think about the statement that it makes. You land on a planet that's, let's say, a jungle planet or a forest planet, and you have all of these legions of troops in white armor that stand out against everything. Can't hide behind anything, right? I can see you from a mile away. It's arrogant, but it conveys a sense of power, right? We don't have to hide from you. We don't have to pretend like this is going to be a fair fight. We're going to march on your planet. We're going to destroy you, right? So the Empire is this pure, faceless, evil power that's going to crush everything. Well, now we take the helmet off and we see there's a guy there. Looks just like us. He's a normal dude. And he's defecting. Wait a minute. Now he has a conscience. And he feels bad about what stormtroopers do. That is a huge thing to develop. That character, that motivation, that story right there has so much potential. He could have been the protagonist of the trilogy. The former stormtrooper who becomes a leader in the rebellion, or whatever that's called this week, the resistance, the we're not happy with the status quo group, whatever they are, right? But he becomes a leader. He finds his humanity after being programmed killer, finds an adopted family and in his comrades, finds his place in the universe. He develops courage and leadership and learns to love humanity and whatever. That's a great story. He could be the next general. It's like Han Solo in a way, right? You have a guy who's a selfish jerk, who's only motivated by money. He lives outside the law, but yet he gets drawn into this cause of the rebellion, finds his people, finds love in Leia, finds camaraderie and companionship with Luke, right? Finds a cause, redeems himself, becomes a man of principle, and becomes a hero, a legend. Same thing could have happened with Finn, right? He's this lowly sanitation trooper who on his first day in the infantry goes to a planet, murders a bunch of villagers, and says, you know what, this First Order thing really isn't cool. And so he turns and he becomes an asset to the resistance and becomes a leader, whatever. Like, again, you take him over 3 movies with that would be awesome. But instead, he just spends 3 movies shouting Rey. And Captain Phasma is a similar story, because here we have a stormtrooper who isn't uniform to all the other stormtroopers. And unlike an Imperial officer, another captain, let's say Captain Nita or Captain whomever for the various ships, doesn't wear the regular Imperial uniform. She wears a very specific and unique stormtrooper outfit. And she doesn't have a designation, right? She's not TK421. She is Captain Phasma. So very intriguing tidbits about this character. We have a woman who is a leader, who is a stormtrooper, but she's not like the other stormtroopers. She stands out. She has a different colored uniform. She goes by a person's name, not by a designation. And clearly she's in the hierarchy because she works with Hux and with Kylo and others, right? She's on the bridge. She does the meetings, right? But what we get is a really cool visual of her walking around, and then they find her at the end and throw her in the garbage chute. And initially, in the very beginning, when she first interacts with Kylo, like there's something set up there where you could, if you had done Finn's defection correctly, maybe we get a little more interaction with Captain Phasma, and we learn that she's a real brutal kind of lady, where she beats her stormtroopers or whatever, and you're gonna get in line, you're never gonna take your helmet off in front of anybody. Why didn't you shoot? Your gun didn't shoot. You're bad. You're a bad stormtrooper. You're going back to sanitation. Whatever. We didn't get any of that. Right? We could have again developed her character. She could have really become evil, but all we get is she comes across as a little bit of a micromanager, and then she turns quickly to save her butt, so she's a coward, right? And then they throw her in a garbage chute, and you're like, wow, that was a whole lot of nothing. And I felt bad for Gwendolyn Christie, because she's out there just doing the Lord's work on the press tour, talking about how awesome her character is and how this movie is so amazing and you're going to love it, and this character is so great, and she's this powerful woman, and we're all into it. We're like, yeah. And then we see the movie, and we're like, did they cut your scenes out? Because what you're talking about right now doesn't really feel like this empowered woman evil character you're talking about. It just feels like set dressing. It's one of, again, many missed opportunities, underdeveloped character that had so much potential that was just wasted.
Next, let's do The Amazing Wonder Ray. Mind trick, meditation, lightsaber skills, is Rey a Mary Sue?
Yes, Rey, in the actual definition of what a Mary Sue is, Rey is a Mary Sue. A female character who is overly skilled, has no consequences, there's no character development, right? They start the story as the most powerful, most capable, most able, most liked character, and they stay that way throughout the entire story, and they are there to instruct or guide established characters. For those who don't know, the Mary Sue character comes from a Star Trek fan fiction. The character tells Kirk how to be a good leader and tells Spock how to be a good science officer and fixes the engines for Scotty, like all this crap, and whatever. Rey, she's the best scavenger. She's got all these skills. She finds all the best parts, gets her 1/4 portion, and she's got abilities when it comes to fighting off strangers, and when it comes to randomly getting in a spaceship and dogfighting with trained TIE fighter pilots. Like she can just magically understand everything about how the ship works and give a lecture to Han Solo, who spent, the majority of his life living in, flying on, and loving the Millennium Falcon, giving him instructions on how it actually works and what he needs to do to make it fly better. And then picking up a lightsaber out of the snow and competently dueling and defeating a Sith Lord, or a Sith Lord in training, or at least someone who has had a portion of his youth spent training under Luke Skywalker. And now we are also given Snoke, who is also training him on how to use the dark side. So arguably he's been trained by the two most powerful Force users in the galaxy, and he is the descendant of Darth Vader and related to Luke, and yet new girl who's never held a lightsaber in her life picks it up out of the snow and promptly defeats him and slices his face open. Never had to earn it, never had to learn anything. We didn't get a training montage until the third film, after it's way too late. She's just that good. And it's a Kathleen Kennedy self-insert, because she's the best producer and director in all of Hollywood. And if you listen to Spielberg and others talk about her, she would show up to a meeting to take notes and be the meeting minutes keeper and the coffee getter, and she would inject herself into production discussions and try and give creative notes to some of the finest directors and writers in the history of Hollywood. And then it spirals out of control and goes in the whole Forces female debacle, and her parading around the fact that her entire writing room is all women, and and on and on and on and on. So it doesn't bode well for the character and for the arc of the story when we get this iteration of Force user who just shows up. As people who went and saw the movie the first time when it was in the theater, we were looking for clues and trying to figure out, where does she come from? Clearly she's related to somebody because she's this powerful Force user just out of nowhere. Well, who else is like that? Well, Anakin. He didn't have a lot of training initially, but he was using Force abilities to fly his pod racer. Luke, similarly, without actually saying it, he's a very good pilot himself. Probably passively or not fully understanding, tapping into the Force a little bit there on some of that with the reaction times and things, as we learned in the prequels. So we're all sitting there going, well, she's got to be like, it's either Luke's kid or it's Obi-Wan's kid or something. Before our Snoke theories sucked, who Rey's parents were theories also sucked. But we were again given mystery box material from JJ. We see the flashback of her as a little girl with Unkar Plot and the ship flying off into the distance. Okay, somebody clearly left her there. There was a reason for that. Maybe she was Luke Skywalker's kid. Maybe she needs to be hidden from the First Order or from the Knights of Ren or whatever, another group of people we never got to figure out who they were. it was very disappointing because if we look at Luke's character in the first film, everybody's like, oh, well, he was a Mary Sue too. No, he wasn't. We established the things that Luke was good at before he went on his adventure, right? He's mechanically inclined. He's a brilliant pilot. And they bring up the fact that he's a bush pilot, which has a very specific connotation. It's a dangerous type of flying, right? It's low altitude. It's against the rocks. It's doing all these things. And then he also talks about how some people go hunting. He used to go flying and shooting womp rats. Okay, fine. But again, we had set up the fact that this is something that he does on a regular basis and practices quite regularly. There was, if you listen to the radio drama, some of the scenes that were originally written for the screenplay that were cut out, either never filmed or completely cut out in editing. Luke establishes his character on Tatooine as a guy who regularly competes in races, is known for a dangerous brand of flying, very courageous in that sense, or foolhardy, depending on how you want to look at it. And he's bored as hell, and he's looking for adventure. Okay, so that's his character before he ever steps foot anywhere near Han or Ben or anybody, right? He goes on an adventure. He's helped by a Jedi Master, a couple of pirates, and a princess, and a few droids. They get on the Death Star. They're going to save the princess, whatever. He needs everybody's help. They formulate a plan. It's teamwork. Can't do it all by himself. And he winds up falling in with a large military organization that has set itself in opposition to the Empire, and he chips into the effort. He's surrounded by other pilots when they attack the Death Star. He doesn't fight Vader. He doesn't use his lightsaber, really. I mean, he starts to have a little bit of training with Obi-Wan. He starts to open up his mind's eye. He starts to expose him to the Force and how to tap into it, right? But he's not a Jedi Master. Even that lucky shot that he makes on the Death Star at the end, he has to have the Force ghost of Obi-Wan coach him through the process of letting go enough and trusting the Force enough to make the shot. Okay. We then say in the second film, okay, he's learned a few things on his own. We're many years down the road now. He's on Hoth. He uses the lightsaber, fights off the Wampa or whatever. He's kind of trained himself to do the Force, moving of the lightsaber, pulling it out of the snowbank. But it's work for him. He has to try several times. He really has to focus, or focus on focusing. It isn't until he goes and does his entire thing with Yoda where he really starts to become more of a Jedi Knight. And then he goes and fights Vader, and what happens? He gets his ass kicked, right? He gets his hand cut off. He gets thrown down a garbage chute, right? People who claim that Luke was the Mary Sue, and it's just like Rey. Well, no, Rey didn't have to learn anything. She just showed up. She uses the Jedi mind trick the first time. No. Nobody does that. Luke, he had to have somebody introduce the concept of the Jedi mind trick to him. Rey just knows how to do it. He had to be given a lightsaber and shown by Ben Kenobi how to hold it and use it and defend against the training droid thing. Right? She just picks it up and gets into a full duel and knows how to parry and thrust and defend and ward off and all this stuff. A trained duelist, a powerful Force user trained by a powerful Sith Lord and a powerful Jedi Knight. He just kicks his butt right there. And the only thing that saves him from I guess, her doing a revenge killing on him or whatever is that the planet cracks open in between them and she has to leave. And it's like all these things, right? She closes her eyes, you get the Force theme, and then you know how to beat Kylo Ren. And then we have 2 movies later, we get told this BS story about the dyad and the Force and how the light rises to meet the dark, and it's always this balance and all stuff. Well, if that's the case, then why do we need a chosen one to bring balance to the Force if the Force balances itself? None of this stuff makes sense. The deeper you get into it, the more questions you ask, the more stupid it all becomes. And it's like, and then like we're supposed to believe that there's some kind of character growth for Rey, and it's like, no. Like the third movie, we show her running through the woods and flipping her lightsaber. It's like, well, why is she doing that? Now we question the training montage because it's like in the last movie she floated a million rocks and she saved the universe and she did all this stuff and she's kicked the hell out of Kylo Ren and she knows all these things, these tricks and all this stuff. Like, why is she training now? She doesn't need to do that. She's a Jedi Master already. So even when you're trying to retcon the Mary Sue concept, it just comes across as stupid because you made her such a Mary Sue that none of this makes any sense. So yeah, she's a Mary Sue, and sorry if I offended anybody with that, but it is what it is.
When has the Grand Admiral ever worried about giving offense?
Never.
Yeah, don't forget her reversal of the mind probe. We see Kylo getting into Poe's head and breaking him. Rey not only blocks it, but flips it around, and she probes Kylo's mind. As of 2015, you could read people's minds and probe them with the Force, but you could also block a mind probe and set up your own probe and thereby acquire an entire Jedi and Sith skill set. It's like the Matrix. She jacked in and now she knows Kung Fu.
Right. Instead of dialing it back and saying, yeah, maybe we went a little too far in that first movie, you know, maybe we should have the training montage in the second film, right? We just keep going. And now we can have what used to be the Force Ghost would show up, you know, run, Luke, run, you know, like all that kind of stuff. Now it's just, we can just Force call each other, right? Like what a lot of people call it Force Skype. It's like, oh, I can see you, but I can't see where you're at. It's like, oh, do you like what I'm wearing? You know, it's just, it's weird, man. You make the most powerful, unexplained, most powerful Jedi girl in the galaxy, and then you make her more and more and more powerful, and you invent new Force powers for her all the friggin' time, every movie, and it's just like, it becomes absurd, right? And then you're like, well, you know, the Force does strange things, and sometimes when there's really bad Force, there's got to be really good Force, right? And it's like, okay, that's stupid, because that wasn't the situation. The whole prequel saga is about the prophecy of the chosen one who brings balance to the Force, not the Force bringing balance to the Force, but yet we got the girl who brings the balance because she does the thing, because the guy can do the thing, because now we just stop it.
It's very dumb. And speaking of dumb, feel free to address them in any order. The Knights of Ren, Snoke, and Anakin's lightsaber.
A good story for another time. Yes, those three things. The Knights of Ren. What are they? Who are they? Where do they come from? Why is Kylo Ren the Lord of the Knights of Ren? Why does Kylo have the name Ren? What's the connection? We get a Force vision, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, in The Force Awakens. And then we get the U2 music video helicopter shot in the third film. And then they get slaughtered by Kylo. We still don't know what their story is. The great thing about the JJ, mystery box is that it gets the fans talking, myself included, right? We were all excited about the movie. We engaged in all kinds of speculation, waiting for the second, film in the trilogy to come out. We're like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. We're going to find out who Snoke is. The Knights of Ren are going to be so dope. They're dark. They're dark side dudes. But why don't they have lightsabers? Like, oh my God, what's going on? None of that paid off at all. Why is Kylo Ren Kylo? Was he indoctrinated into something and given a role to oversee the Knights? Were the Knights already working for Snoke? Who is Snoke? Why is he not Darth Snoke? Why is he not Emperor Snoke? Right? He's Supreme Leader Snoke. I get it, whatever. But why isn't he Darth something? Right? Snoke, because we have no backstory on Snoke, he's a Sith Lord. He's training a Sith apprentice, right? Why does he go by Supreme Leader Snoke? He doesn't need to be that. He could be Darth Snoke or Darth whatever. Maybe Snoke is his given name, and that's, when he goes to vote, he shows his driver's license as Snoke, and is like, okay, I'm going to vote for myself for Supreme Leader. But he's got a Sith name, right? He should have a Sith name. Or they're not really Sith, and then that raises a whole different question. Well, what are they if they're not Sith? So again, you start applying the rules of the universe and the logic that's been established in the previous 6 films to these characters and to these situations, and it just all starts to, make you crazy because there is no real good answer. There's no real logical conclusion that you can draw on any of this stuff. And so we have these really cool looking dudes, the Knights of Ren. They're like this intergalactic Sith Lord motorcycle gang that's ready to wreck shop no matter what. And Kylo's their leader. But all we get is a couple of quick things. We get a Force vision in the first movie, and then they're kind of like chasing Rey, but not really doing a very good job of it. Kylo quickly dispatches them, in the third film. So what are the Knights of Ren? Who knows? And good luck to you, finding out. The lightsaber. We still don't have any answers or anything about that. Period. End of sentence. I don't care what they wrote in a novel or a comic book. It was never really fully explained, and all that stuff gets contradicted anyway by the movies. So some lady who's 1,000 years old and has a bar and a crush on Chewbacca has in her basement Luke Skywalker's lightsaber, and she's been friends with Han Solo for a long time, and he continuously comes to her place because she knows who Chewbacca is enough to have a crush on him. She never thought once to mention to, his brother-in-law, you want it? Is it because it's so powerful? Is it because it's tainted by the dark side of the Force because it was used to slaughter many younglings? What's the story here? You start trying to reason with these decisions, these choices, and it all unravels and becomes absurd. And the thing that really gets me about, and again, something that has come over the years in hindsight, JJ's making fun of his audience. He's openly mocking you. Rey and Finn fly the Falcon. They shoot down the TIE fighters. They have this great moment. And Finn comes running to the cockpit. He's totally fanboying. He's like, oh my God, I've never seen flying like that ever in my life. Oh my God, you're so amazing. How did you do that? And she's like, I don't know. I just did it. It was so cool. Really? Because the entire audience has the same question that Finn has. How did you do that, young lady? If you're a scavenger slave who lives in the inside of an AT-AT or whatever it was, right? Breaking down starships for quarter portions of meals. How did you learn to fly that thing? You even say as you're getting in the cockpit before you take off, you've never actually flown this ship before. You've only flown little things, never a starship, nothing with a hyperdrive. Yet I have a compressor that I'm going to bypass, but never mind about that. And then this creepy old lady with the glasses busts open, the hope chest, and there's a lightsaber sitting in there, and oh my God, it's Luke's lightsaber, his dad's lightsaber, Anakin. What? That went down a chute on Bespin 35, 40 years ago, and now it's just chilling in your basement. And everybody's asking the same question that Han is asking, where the hell did you get that? And she says, a good story for another time. No, that's a really good story to tell me right now, because I'm really confused. Like, why do you have that thing? You could maybe forgive J.J. Abrams if you're like, he just didn't know. He wrote himself into a corner, and he's like, we got to move on to the next thing, right? Otherwise, this is going to be like a 12-hour movie, right? Whatever. So he's just skipping around and trying to, do the best he can with what he's got. The fact that he writes in these lines of these characters is he's acknowledging the fact that the audience is going to have questions about what is going on the screen, what is going on with the plot, why are these things happening? Somebody explain to me how any of this makes sense. And the characters practically turn to the screen and go, you don't get to know. You don't deserve to know. Shut up, eat your popcorn, and wait for the next scene to happen. And it's so maddening, right? Nobody knows about the lightsaber. Why is it there? Also, something nobody knows. Rey touches the lightsaber. And she has all these visions of all these things, right? Associated potentially, I guess, with the lightsaber, but not everything is associated with the lightsaber because we get the Knights of Ren deal. So, or was Luke there? I don't know, right? We don't know. Nobody explains anything. More mystery boxes. My question, though, is when Obi-Wan Kenobi reaches into his wood box and pulls out, Anakin's lightsaber and hands it to Luke, and Luke touches it, he doesn't have any weird visions. He doesn't have any flashbacks. He doesn't, smell the crispy younglings on it, right? He's just That's cool. He turns it on, boom, boom, boom. And it's the Excalibur, reveal from the lake or whatever. But it's not anything, there's no mystical, magical properties to it. And it was that way all the way up to the point where it was cut out of his hand. So when did this thing suddenly become a talisman or a Harry Potter Horcrux where the Force lives inside this lightsaber now suddenly? And so when you touch it, it tells you what, questions on top of questions that produce more questions. And none of them that J.J. Abrams probably ever thought about or didn't think about them beyond the fact to tell the audience, stop asking questions. Where did the lightsaber come from, Maz? Shut up. Get on your ship. The First Order's coming. And you, Stormtrooper, yell Rey a bunch. Okay? Snoke. Well, yeah, so we kind of talked about Snoke a little bit. Snoke, again, who is he? Where does he come from? Is he the Emperor? Is he somebody else? We heard Snoke theories. Let's see. He was a clone of the Emperor, which technically wound up being kind of true if you look at the Jug of Snokes, Rise of Skywalker. Maybe he's another Darth somebody from back in the day. Maybe he's one of the younglings that survived the slaughter, and that's why he's all deformed. Whatever. Right? There's all kinds of backstories. None of them were true. Again, they tried to explain it badly in the Mandalorian show, and I still don't think it was very clear, but I think that they tried to take the Moff Gideon cloning line thing and try and explain to the audience how a Snoke could be created by taking Baby Yoda blood and mixing it with some, goo in a vat, and Frankenstein hit the switch, run some electricity through it, and he got a Snoke. I don't know. What was his motivation? Where did he come from? Right? Because we had the Emperor. We had the Emperor and Vader, right? Rule of two. So where did this guy come from? Was he a side piece? Was he a failed apprentice of Vader? You've got to have an evil Sith user or Sith Lord Force user to run this new Imperial Force. Okay, fine. But where did he come from? It's like when we ask questions about all these Jedi now that have shown up. Right? When Episode 4 happened, it was Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke, and then we got Yoda, and then that was it. There was no more Jedi. It was just those guys. Ben, Yoda dead, Luke, the last Jedi Knight, right? He takes down the Emperor. It's him and his dad balancing the Force. His dad dies on the good side, right? There's only one good Jedi left. The Force ghosts show up at the end. We yub nub and have a barbecue. But then we start seeing these escapees of Order 66 after we get the prequels. Oh, there's this Padawan who got away. Oh, there's this, Jedi that was corrupted. They were given the choice, join or die, become an Inquisitor or die. So they became Inquisitors. So now we have the sisters and brothers. There's I don't know, they all have these numbers. I'm 5th brother, 12th sister, 7th uncle, 3rd cousin, twice removed on your mom's side, right? We have all these weird designations. So there's clearly a bunch of them. And then we keep finding all these Padawans and all this stuff. It's Jedi in hiding, and they got video game characters, and you got comic book characters, and you got cartoon characters, and we've got Ahsoka Tano, and we've got, stack them up. So tell me where Snoke came from. Somewhere in this storyline, after the fall of the Empire, after the rise of the New Republic, and after Ahsoka goes and disappears into the nether regions, this dude magically appears and organizes a clone of the Empire with a Death Star and Star Cruisers and millions of stormtroopers and all this other stuff. Where does he come from? Who is he? Why do people swear loyalty to him? Why is he the supreme leader? What does he hold over people? Was he elected? Was he a despot? What was his connection to the previous regime? Because if you follow the lore and some of the ancillary material, Hux, his dad was an officer in the old Empire, right? And so there's that continuity, right? And then there's talk about this council that we got in the Mando show, right? We had this dark council of former Imperial officers and governors and others, the client, right? All these people, the Imperial remnant, right? They're forming a new order, which becomes the First Order, which is the final order. I don't know. Anyway, that's probably the easiest. The First Order is probably the easiest thing to explain, in the sense that it's a descendant of the Empire. But where did he come from? And then, so was Snoke like rich? Was he like some dude on the other side of the galaxy in the Badlands beyond Tatooine, where nobody's been before, and he has like sitting on a gold planet, and he's like, yeah, I can buy that, no problem. But you got to make me supreme leader, and I get to wear my jammies to work every day because I like wearing robes. I'm kind of the Hugh Hefner of the dark side, right? Like, between films, we get Rian Johnson clowning the fans. And this is the thing that just kills me. Disney talks about how, the fans are so mean and they're so toxic and and they're so evil and bad, right? The director of the second movie in your trilogy installment openly mocked the fans for their enthusiasm for your product, right? All the fans got together and we're like, oh my God, what's Snoke going to be? Oh, he's this, he's that. What's going to happen in this movie? And he's out there on the internet going, your Snoke theory sucks and you're all idiots. Well, it turns out all of our theories did suck, because what happened in the second movie was not any of our theories, that he was nothing and that he would be killed unceremoniously and never be talked about again. Yeah, that was not on my bingo card, right, for The Last Jedi. But this guy openly rips the fans, like, you're attacking us, like all this goodwill you got, all the things we were willing to excuse from The Force Awakens because we believe you're going to give us the answers and you're going to carry this forward in a meaningful way that makes everyone happy, and you're ripping us? Like, get off of Twitter, dude. You're almost parodying yourself, and you're just kind of like, we don't know what we're doing. Nobody knows what's going on. Let's just, throw it all against the wall and see what sticks, and then run credits. And then please subscribe to Disney Plus.
Let's focus on the Force Awakens supplementary material. Everyone knows Star Wars' biggest revenue stream doesn't flow from ticket sales. It flows from toys, video games, clothing, novels, comics, etc. The Force Awakens merchandise performed well for retailers. However, the more perceptive began to notice red flags in the ancillary stories. The Force Awakens was filled with unanswered questions, so Kennedy Film marketed its novels and comics with the pretense of backstory. The studio launched a progression called Journey to the Force Awakens. For me, these books were the end of the beginning. You are a collector. What did you think of the merchandise?
So initially, I very much got into collecting the toys. I went to Force Friday that year for the first time. Went to Toys R Us at midnight, got in line, bought the figures, did all that stuff. The 3 3/4 line and the Black Series line from the first film. And I still have a full, complete run of all the 3 3/4 Force Awakens figures that came out. I have since sold off all the Black Series. Full disclosure, I took all those 3 3/4 figures and I recarded them on 6x9 card backs so they look like vintage figures, but whatever. I was very much on board with that. I was all into it. I did not buy the novels. I have a complicated relationship with Star Wars books, but just tie-in books, series tie-in books in general. I got to the point when the Courtship of Princess Leia came out, and I read that book, and I was like, this is abject garbage. And I stopped buying books at that point for Star Wars. And I missed out on a couple of things. Timothy Zahn came back with a few more Thrawn books that I missed initially. I didn't read those until many years later. I didn't buy any of the mass market little paperback stories that came out. I didn't buy at that point any of the comic books. So when Dark Horse was doing the comic, I wasn't buying any comic books. I had no interest in any of that, kind of because I got burned on the novel or the novels. But then when Disney bought Star Wars, Disney already owned Marvel Comics, so they had announced that Marvel was going to get the license back and like all this stuff. And so I got enthusiastic about the comic books. I am a comic book collector. I collected many titles over the years. So the comic book collecting was more in my wheelhouse over the novels. And so I started getting the Star Wars comics as they initially came out. So they were doing original trilogy characters in comics. And they started introducing some new characters like Dr. Aphra. And that was in like the Vader comic initially. But then they also started putting in these multi-issue, short-run, limited series of Captain Phasma and some Kylo Ren stuff and the one shot about 3PO's red arm. They did the Poe Dameron series, which I got the entire run of that. But late in the Poe Dameron run, it started to become clear to me that we weren't really getting answers to the questions in the films. And the films weren't doing necessarily a good job of addressing what happened in the previous film. And the side material that I was engaged with was not doing a good job. And I had heard enough, having friends and being part of the YouTube Star Wars community. You're a huge consumer of the novels and paperbacks and things like that. I heard enough from people about these books that were being written that what little attempts were made to try and clarify issues in the films were deeply unsatisfying. And then a majority of the things just weren't addressed. We were told that the expanded universe was now considered Legends. None of that counts. We have a fresh slate. And we were specifically told by Disney, everything going forward, no matter what venue or format that it is released in, everything is canon and everything is complementary. So comic books, novels, video games, cartoons, films, and eventually TV shows, it's all complementary. It all works together. It does not contradict. It enhances, right? And so we're like, okay, great. And they started putting things out. And from what I understand about the Aftermath series of novels, they were billed as explaining how we got to the universe that we arrived in at the beginning of The Force Awakens. Turns out that's only partially true, right? It addresses the Battle of Jakku, and that's about it. The Poe Dameron comic talks about guys redeveloping the TIE fighter into something new, which is the black TIE fighter that we got in The Force Awakens with the red stripes on it. But didn't really talk about the First Order. It was talking about industrialists who were financing this new TIE fighter, but it didn't really give you anything more than that. We get into sort of how Snoke seduced Ben Solo to the dark side, but not very well done and kind of laughable. I mean, he's a gardener, but the comic books contradict one another. And so suddenly we're sitting here going, I still have all these questions about characters, events, world building, the political landscape of the universe in this current Disney Star Wars era, and I'm not getting any answers. I'm getting things advertised to me like they are going to provide answers, so I go buy them and I look at them and I read them and whatever, and they don't help, or they don't fully answer. They create more questions, and so my relationship with the merchandise, the surrounding material, started off very strong with The Force Awakens, and through Rogue One, right? So I bought all the figures and the toys and everything for Rogue One. Still have all those. Love that stuff. But then when we got into The Last Jedi, and I went to Force Friday for that one too. I went to Force Friday for Rogue One, right? Bought the figures. I bought a lot of figures, started getting into that, and I went and saw the movie, and then I just stopped. I canceled all my comic book, subscription, or my subscription to the various Star Wars comic book titles, and that was starting to happen kind of going into that, in that post Rogue One era. I was really not liking the stories and the characters and the new things that they were doing. I was still kind of enjoying the Vader series and then in some of the stuff around the original characters. But when they did like the Screaming Citadel thing, that's kind of when I started to check out. And again, this is being billed and sold as this is canon. So now Han Solo has an ex-wife that we've never heard about in any other, iteration of Star Wars. None of the people who were out to get Solo or people who belittled Solo, like the various gangs at the beginning of Force Awakens. Nobody said anything about your ex-wife is looking for you, whatever, right? Like, it's just something that randomly comes up in a comic book, and we're supposed to just say, oh, of course he has an ex-wife, right? So anyway, I started to get really kind of not really excited about that stuff, and I was starting to check out of that. But then when we saw, Last Jedi, I was just like, yeah, I'm just done with all this stuff. I just stopped really caring about the new characters and went back to looking at, original trilogy and prequel characters and, some of the video game stuff. But again, I was moving away from the new content, the surrounding paraphernalia of the saga trilogy stuff. Really, I just really stopped engaging with it as soon as I saw The Last Jedi.
I'll set down my interviewer's microphone and enter my fan's pulpit for a minute or two. I recognized beyond any doubt that we, the fans, were in trouble through the supplementary material. Until The Last Jedi, I read everything published for Star Wars. Aftermath, the first book in Chuck Wendig's trilogy, was highly problematic. Its tone and themes were incompatible with George Lucas's Star Wars, and it had nothing whatsoever to say about The Force Awakens. After months of reading, I learned the entirety of Journey to The Force Awakens had no bearing on the film, or vice versa. In hindsight, the reason was clear. Kennedy Film didn't have a story for the sequel trilogy. They were winging the films one by one. So, of course, the supplementary material for The Force Awakens exposed the absent narrative. No one fleshed out the characters and plot in advance. The novels and comics were dancing around the First Order, Starkiller Base, Supreme Leader Snoke, Kylo Ren, the Resistance, Luke Skywalker, the map, Rey's childhood, and all the other unanswered questions. As you said, we were told everything is canon, one unified canon. But the new novels and comics weren't adding anything to canon. Many people rationalized the lack of meaningful storytelling with speculation about a Disney directive to avoid spoilers. In the end, Journey to The Force Awakens was a waste of money and time. By the second novel in Wendig's trilogy, I'd checked out. You, Sean, as my witness, I purged all my sequel trilogy merch, that is my TFA merch, in the wake of The Last Jedi. But my purchases ended before Rogue One. I hadn't given up on the saga, not completely, not yet, but I awakened to the fraud being perpetrated by Kennedy Film. It was always the next novel or the next comic that would provide a missing piece of the puzzle. Phasma, Hosnian Prime. Just keep reading, folks. You've almost reached a big reveal. Bullshit. And the authors were terrible. We sank from Timothy Zahn, Matthew Stover, and Steve Perry to Chuck Wendig, Greg Rucka, and Claudia Gray. You may justifiably criticize the expanded universe's last gasps. They were very weird. In the early EU, 8 out of 10 books were worthwhile. Their tone and themes fit the galaxy far, far away, and they contained relevant details. Bibliophiles were rewarded with information. I would rather read Fate of the Jedi 10 times than read Aftermath once. So, J.J. Abrams' mystery box collapse preceded the rise of Skywalker. His comeuppance began in the pages of meaningless YA novels and comics from second-rate creators prior and subsequent to The Force Awakens. As a guy who enjoys Star Wars books, I was awfully frustrated by the studio's approach. The supplementary reading might have been the worst aspect of Star Wars between 2015 and 2017. When The Last Jedi drew flack from everyone with a functioning brain, several of Kennedy's lackeys, including Rian Johnson, taunted fans with a sign that read, "Your Snoke theory sucks." I have a rebuttal. Fans wouldn't have Snoke theories if you, millionaires in charge of the most successful entertainment IP in history, developed the sequel's plots and characters before you recorded 1 second of the first film. Period. You've pointed out many of TFA's shortcomings, but upon reflection, you were honest about your feelings. I think conditional satisfaction is an accurate description of us at the time. 2 years later, The Last Jedi caused the negativity that still surrounds Star Wars. When one searches for a shatter point, all roads lead to Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy. Most people were excited about Disney's acquisition. Most people enjoyed The Force Awakens. And most people looked to the next film, the middle chapter, for answers. Based on Marvel and Pixar, fans trusted the mouse. Current bitterness has clouded previous optimism. Kathleen Kennedy, handpicked by George Lucas, Disney, the Premier Entertainment Corporation, they've got a plan. They've got this. In retrospect, the difficult part is a frank recollection. I want to convey two truths through our review. 1. The Force Awakens was well received. 2. The Force Awakens shouldn't have been well received. What say you?
Oh, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And I would also, I would even double down on it and say that while we may have, we had great goodwill with The Force Awakens, and we all, a majority of us came away from it maybe not over the top excited and happy about it, but definitely not mad, definitely not upset. We were net positive, feeling good about it. And then Rogue One hit, and we were over the moon. The goodwill went way up, right? And I think that we could tell ourselves the lie that we'll get all the answers and we'll get all the things we want from Disney, and we can trust Disney because they gave us Rogue One. Like, you got Rogue One, and this is the most amazing Star Wars since Empire Strikes Back. Clearly they get it. Clearly they understand it. It's this amazing installment in the story. Slots perfectly into the universe. It has all the right beats and all the right stuff, and the characters are well written, and it's and all that stuff. And so now we're reinforcing in our minds, well, yeah, there was a couple of weird things about The Force Awakens, but look at this Rogue One, monster. That's like, it's so amazing. We know it's going to be great when The Last Jedi comes out, right? We know we're going to get what we want. We know we're going to get the answers. We know that we're going to get the payoff. All this goodwill will be rewarded. It will be the heyday, the golden age of Star Wars. It's going to be a movie every year, and they're going to be just unbelievably fantastic. This franchise is never going to die. It's going to be the pinnacle of entertainment, right? We were on that trajectory after Rogue One. And I defy anyone who is a Star Wars fan to say otherwise. Yeah, it's easy now, 10 years later, the flop of Rise of Skywalker, all the crappy Disney Plus TV, all the weird comic books and novels that have come out with the High Republic, all the awkward kid show stuff that was tied into the High Republic that nobody bought, the Young Jedi Adventures and all that stuff, like all this junk that we've gotten, all this weird politics and derision and scorn from Disney, to the fans and all that stuff. Of course, it's easy now to be like, yeah, I always hated it. It was always crap. It all sucked. That's just people being defensive, right? And people not wanting to admit that their opinion has changed over time. And it's okay. I am not happy with Star Wars right now. I'm very upset about what has happened in the last however many 13, 14 years or whatever since the sale happened, 13 years, to the Star Wars brand or whatever you want to call it, right? The universe, the IP, the cultural icon that it was has been vandalized by Disney. I want to be hopeful for the future of Star Wars, but I can't, because no major changes have been made to the people who are in charge of it right now. And so I expect more crap, right? I expect the Mando and Grogu movie to suck. I don't have good feelings about Starfighter, right? But I want to believe. I want to be back in that, mindset of where I was in 2015 and 2016 with Rogue One. But I also understand that for me to say now that, it's all junk, it's all garbage, it's always been terrible, and I hate Disney. No, I was excited, man. When Disney bought Star Wars, I remember I was at work talking to some of my nerd bros. Some people were like, I'm not sure, because Star Wars had always been a boutique brand, right? It had always been George's baby. It was his company. It was his story, his universe. He called all the shots, gave a little side eye to the prequels, but for the most part, it was pretty solid. But that was George, man. It was George's thing. And he cared about it. Say what you want. Yeah, as he got older, maybe he got a little jaded or got a little tired or whatever. or just maybe he took the criticism of the prequels way too seriously. Whatever happened, he just got to the point in his life. He's like, I got a new girlfriend or whatever. I've got all the money I need. I don't have the time to do the things I want to do. Let me just get this. Let me sell it. Right. Nobody really wanted him to get rid of it. But in 2012, you look around the world and you look at all the people who could afford to kick $4 billion to buy Star Wars. And I don't know what that is adjusted in 2025 dollars. It's probably a lot more, probably 10 or 12 or whatever. But you look around the people who could actually afford it. The only people you felt like they could be good stewards of the brand would be Disney. And we had ample evidence in the moment that Disney would be a good steward of it because we saw what they were doing with Marvel. And again, this is early stage 1, stage 2 Marvel, where you're getting all the Iron Man films and the Captain America films and like the first Thor movie, and like stuff is great. This is before, Captain Marvel and the Eternals and all that stuff, right? But back when superhero movies were coming out in the theater, they were appointment viewing. Like, hold all my calls. I'm going to the midnight premiere. Like, I want to see what happens next with Iron Man, And so we're looking around and we're like, well, look at this plan that they've developed with Marvel, right? We're going to get individual origin stories for each character. And then we're going to get some, minor crossovers, and we're going to get some post-credit cameos, and we're going to start laying some Easter eggs or whatever for, a larger storyline, and an interconnected purpose and mission. And then we're going to have this Avengers, movie where they come together, and then we might have a few more individual movies, and then we're going to have this big finale event, the Infinity War, and we're bringing in Thanos, and we got the Gauntlet and all this, and it's going to be just amazing, right? And then we look at Star Wars and we're like, imagine what they would if they could do that with this universe that we love, right? Yeah, we've got Skywalker saga or whatever, but like we could have a side film, we could have a Boba Fett movie, or we could have a Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, or we could have a Pirates of the Outer Rim movie. Like, let's go. We had all of this animation, we had a video game company, we had all these things in Lucasfilm. We saw how Disney merchandises and how they do things in theme parks. As soon as they bought it, I was like, I wonder if they're going to do a Star Wars land at Disneyland. And sure enough, they did that, These are all things, right? These are all things that gave us hope and enthusiasm for the brand, for the future of the brand. And we're like, well, if it has to be sold, if George has to give it up, Disney is going to be the right place for it to land. And initially, maybe we had some rose-colored glasses on, right? Maybe we were, ignoring some of the signs, right? It's like when you first start dating somebody and you're like, well, maybe they'll start chewing with their mouth closed. And eventually you realize, no, they're really just kind of a bum and they're gross and you probably shouldn't be together, right? Well, that didn't happen until Last Jedi. We were on an upward trajectory. Yeah, it was a little bumpy with The Force Awakens, but when we hit full stride with Rogue One, sky's the limit. Fans, happy. Casuals were happy. I think I've told the story before on this channel many, many years ago, but when my brother, who's older than me, he was a big Star Wars kid. He was right in the wheelhouse when the first movie came. He's, 5 years older than me, so he was just the perfect age when the first one came out. I was a little young, but saw it again several times in the re-releases. And by the time I hit Return of the Jedi, I was in that perfect wheelhouse. My brother had kind of gotten a little old for that, moved on. But he's always had a sort of a soft spot for Star Wars, but he was never a collector and he was never into all that stuff. And it's not his personality, but he's always kind of had a soft spot for Star Wars. And so he and I went and saw The Force Awakens, and he was like, yeah, it was okay. He goes, it was fine. Star Wars. Then he and I went and saw Rogue One, and he was like, that is a Star Wars movie, right? And he was like fired up about Rogue One. He was like, this is what I came here for, right? This is why I signed up for, coming back to Star Wars as a grown-ass man. And so you had the casuals were happy. Everybody was moving. We were all marching to the same beat. We were loving Star Wars. And yes, there was a few people who were farther over the horizon than we were and recognized things for what they were. And there were some people like yourself and myself that were starting to see some problems with some things kind of surrounding the edges of it. But we really didn't get smacked in the face with the failure until we walked out of the theater after our first viewing of The Last Jedi.
We're 10 years removed from The Force Awakens. In 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what will be the film's legacy? Will it have any relevance to future generations?
I believe that the legacy of The Force Awakens is going to be mixed. I think it will have a place in history like Jaws 3D has a place in history. Jaws 3 in 3D, right? It's going to stand as a warning, as a cautionary tale to future entertainers. Again, I don't know what the future of Hollywood's going to look like. I don't know what the future of television or whatever is going to look like. But for people who want to create entertainment or visual media, or who want to take on the process of extending the legacy of something that's beloved into the future, there are things about it, again, that you can point to, right? The machine around The Force Awakens that was put into action to capitalize on the fans' anticipation, engage the fans in preparing them for the return of something that they love and they've been asking for, right? I mean, the interviews, the ads, the product tie-ins, the teasers, the stuff, like you're watching the Super Bowl and you get a 30-second first teaser at halftime and you're just like, oh my God, I stopped watching football at that point. And I'm like, messaging everybody I know, like, I forgot the Super Bowl was still on. These are things that from a business standpoint, somebody could look at and say, that was done correctly. You can also look at it from a storytelling and character writing and production standpoint. You can say it was horribly executed at a structural level, as a film, as a story. It could also be a business lesson. Did they have to rush and create a movie within a couple of years of buying it? No, they could have maybe taken 5 years and really taken their time, developed something, and done it right. So I think the legacy of The Force Awakens is going to be is more of an industry lesson, I think, than as a triumph of cinema. Like, the prequels have this weird spot, right? So like The Phantom Menace, a lot of people do not like The Phantom Menace. They hate it. They think it's terrible. It's convoluted, blah, blah, blah. All the things, right? All the things, the bad acting, the bad, whatever. I get it. I have a soft spot for it because I'm a Darth Maul guy. Okay. But that movie will live forever, and it will have a prominent place in the history of cinema for what it was and what it achieved at the time. Just like the first Star Wars movie. You might not be a Star Wars nerd. You might not even be a nerd. You might not even care about science fiction, fantasy, or any of that other crap. But you have to understand and appreciate and accept the fact that the first Star Wars film was a triumph of cinema for a lot of reasons. It completely changed the entire industry, the tone of the entire industry. You were leading up to Star Wars, it was movies like Taxi Driver and, all these horrible, dour, violent, just depressing films. And here along comes this fun romp through the galaxy with a guy who breathes through a respirator and some sword fighting and wow, some explosions and a girl in a dress. Global phenomenon. The message is a little positivity, a little reinforcement of the idea that good always triumphs. Goes a long way. Also, as an industry thing, special effects, the cameras that were created, the makeup, the costumes, the modeling, all that stuff, never done before, or never done like that before, right? Changed the history of film. Same thing with Phantom Menace, digital cinema. George, same guy. How do you catch lightning in a bottle twice? Same guy. Does it again. Digital cinema, all that stuff. Force Awakens is not going to have that kind of elevated cultural or even industry impact, but it will sit there at the periphery of board meetings and creative meetings and movie pitches to studios, right? You know, are you familiar with the tragedy of Darth Jar Jar the Wise or whatever, right? The dark times of Abrams and Kennedy. Don't do what they did. And yeah, you know, again, we've talked about there's sort of this mixed feeling the first couple of years of the Disney films, but once we got to The Last Jedi, we really understood what was going on and how bad it was going to get. But the lesson, and I think the lasting legacy of The Force Awakens is it's really easy to take for granted the goodwill and the generational enthusiasm of people for something and forget how that was created, how it was nurtured, and how it was rewarded. And just producing something to produce something to try and feed that and get rich off it in a cynical cash grab, and how you can kill the golden goose very quickly. I think that will be the lasting legacy of The Force Awakens.
And we'll end our discussion of The Force Awakens 10th anniversary with that thought. Thank you, Sean.
I bypassed the compressor.
Thank you, viewers. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share if you enjoyed the video. And check out Galactic Initiative for all things Star Wars.